I grew up on ghost stories. Around the holidays, my German-born grandmother, who emigrated to New York City after World War II, would pull a blanket over our shoulders and whisper tales passed down by her own mother. Her favorite was The Wild Hunt, a procession of phantom riders and baying hounds said to tear across the sky on stormy winter nights. To a child raised on New England legends, the idea of Odin and his black dogs careening over our apartment building sounded fantastical. But as an adult with a penchant for exploring forgotten myths, I began to wonder whether there was more to it. If dozens of cultures share this motif, maybe there's a kernel of truth in the madness. The first concrete reference to the Wild Hunt that I could find came from the Anglo Saxon Chronicle of 1127. Chroniclers recorded gossip that, after February 6 that year, many people around Peterborough and the woods stretching to Stamford heard a whole pack of huntsmen in full cry and saw black horses and black bucks while their hounds were pitch black with staring, hideous eyes. Reliable witnesses said there were 20 or 30 riders. Medieval monks wrote of hearing their horns echo through the night. Centuries later, the German mythologist Jacob Grimm collected similar tales across northern, western, and eastern Europe and gave the phenomenon its name, Wilde Jagd, noting that it occurs in the religions of the Germans, Celts, and Slavs. According to folklore, a wild hunt involves a mythological figure leading a ghostly retinue of hunters, often the souls of the dead or supernatural dogs. The leader varies with the region. In Germanic lands, it's Wodan, Odin. In Wales, it might be Gwyn ap Nudd. And in parts of England, the hunt is known as Woden's Hunt or Herne, the hunter's ride. Witnessing the hunt is supposed to herald war, plague, or death. Those unlucky enough to cross its path might be abducted to the underworld or forced to join the hunters. In parts of Britain, the procession is a pack of hellhounds. In Devon, they're called Yeth hounds. In Cornwall, Dando and his dogs. In Wales, Cŵn Annwn. And in Somerset, Gabriel Ratchets. It's even said the hunt haunts Wistman's Wood, a twisted oak grove on Dartmoor where moss-covered trees cast shadows like skeletons. Those details stuck with me. If I was going to search for a ghostly cavalcade, I wanted somewhere with a documented connection. In December 2023, armed with an audio recorder, weatherproof gear, and a healthy dose of skepticism, I flew from Boston to Exeter and drove to Dartmoor National Park. It was mid-December, close to the winter solstice, when the wild hunt is said to be most active. Wistman's Wood sits 3 miles from the hamlet of Two Bridges, accessible by a muddy trail. It was mid-afternoon when I arrived, but the sky was already darkening under heavy clouds. The oaks in Wistman's Wood are stunted and twisted, their branches draped in lichen like witch hair. The ground is strewn with moss-covered boulders that make movement slow and treacherous. According to local folklore, the wood is home to pixies and wished hounds. Sheep avoid it. Hikers feel watched. I set up my tent on a patch of flat ground just outside the tree line, close enough to observe but not so deep that I couldn't retreat if a gale blew in. As the daylight seeped away, the wind rose. I recorded observations into my audio log, quoting from Grimm and referencing the Anglo Saxon Chronicle. Every rustle sounded like footsteps. By 9 p.m., the temperature had dropped below freezing. It wasn't snowing, but the air carried ice crystals that pricked my skin. I kept thinking about my grandmother's warnings that people who see the hunt are either carried away or left changed. At 11:47 p.m., my watch beeped the time in the darkness. I heard the first distant horn. It was faint, like someone blowing through a conch across a valley. At first I thought it was the wind moaning through branches, until a second call answered and then a third. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the low rumble of hoofs. I turned off my lantern and moved closer to the wood's edge, crouching behind a boulder. My breath fogged in the cold. An animal yelped, not a fox or a dog, but something deeper and more guttural. I thought of the description from 1127, pitch-black hounds with eyes like coals. My rational mind whispered that I was listening to farmers' dogs on the moor. My instincts told me to run. By midnight, the storm hit. Rain lashed the trees, and the wind screamed. The horns were clearer now, reverberating between the tors. Through gaps in the branches, I glimpsed movement, shapes the size of horses darting among the oaks. I heard the clatter of hooves on stone. A chill settled in my bones that had nothing to do with the weather. I remembered that in some traditions, those who see the hunt from afar can be saved if they throw themselves to the ground and lie face down until it passes. Others say you must offer bread to the hounds. In my pack, I had a crusty baguette from a local bakery. I slid it into my jacket and clutched it like a talisman. Then, as the storm reached a crescendo, the world went unnaturally quiet. The wind died in an instant. The rain stopped. I heard only the pounding of hooves and my own heartbeat. A smell of damp earth and ozone filled the air. Behind me, my tent flapped like a trapped bird. Ahead, through the tangle of oaks, a procession emerged. For a second I wondered if I was hallucinating from cold and fear, but there they were. Riders on enormous black horses, cloaked in shadow, their faces hidden beneath hoods. The horses' eyes glowed pale blue. Hounds ran at their feet, large, spectral beasts with gaping jaws. One hound looked straight at me. Its eyes were white, not red, and its breath steamed in the freezing air. A horned figure at the front raised a hand, and the procession slowed. I realized the hunt was passing within 50 feet of my hiding place. I lay flat on the ground, pressing my cheek against moss and granite. I barely dared to breathe. The sound of hooves grew louder as the cavalcade passed by. The horns blasted overhead, so loud they vibrated my bones. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to think of anything but death. Somewhere behind me, the horns changed pitch. I felt something tug at my jacket. When I opened my eyes, a hound stood over me. It snuffled at my pack. My brain screamed run, but my body refused to move. Slowly, I pulled the bread from my jacket and held it out. The hound sniffed, then snapped up the loaf. Its teeth grazed my fingers. It turned and loped after the riders. The horn sounded again, and the rumble receded. The storm resumed with full force, as if someone had pressed play after hitting pause. I lay there until my bones ached from cold. When I finally crawled back to my tent, it was half collapsed and filled with rainwater. My watch read 12:32 a.m. Less than an hour had passed. I hadn't been swept into the sky or carried miles away, but I knew the story wasn't over. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about the hound's eyes, the way the world went silent. I drifted in and out of a dream in which hooves thundered above me and ghostly voices whispered in Old German. At 3:15 a.m., a time often associated with supernatural events, I woke suddenly to another sound. It was faint, like bells or chains, coming from the direction of the wood. The hunt, my grandmother had said, sometimes returns for those who escape. I wrapped my coat tighter and waited for dawn. By the time the winter sun scraped above the horizon, Wistman's Wood looked innocent again. Mist clung to the mossy boulders like gauze, birds chirped. A few stray sheep grazed on the surrounding moor. I could have chalked the previous night up to an overactive imagination, but three things kept me anchored to reality. First, the muddy hoofprints that crisscrossed the trail, far more than the dozen ponies I'd seen earlier that day. Second, a scorch mark on the stone where the hound had stood, as if its breath seared the moss. And third, a strange object in the pocket of my jacket. A carved wooden whistle carved from dark yew wood, etched with runes I didn't recognize. I hadn't put it there. Had the hound dropped it? Had someone else? It felt warm against my skin. I left Wistman's Wood that morning shaken but curious. Over the following months, I read everything I could about the wild hunt. I discovered that the tradition spans more than just Germany and Britain. In Normandy, the monk Orderic Vitalis wrote in 1091 of a procession of ghostly horsemen called Harlequin's troop, numbering 20 or 30, that plagued the countryside for 9 weeks. Walter Map described a similar cavalcade in 12th century Britain. In Wales, the hunt is led by Gwyn ap Nudd, the lord of the underworld. In France, a living parishioner leads the Santa Campagna, a procession of souls holding candles. Across Europe, variations on the myth agree on certain points. The hunt rides at midwinter. Its leader is associated with the dead, and anyone who sees it may be taken or left with a mark. As weeks turned into months, the carved whistle at my desk became a symbol of unresolved questions. Part of me wanted to put the experience behind me. Another part wondered whether the hunt could be summoned. I read that some practitioners of magic used to try to join the hunt in spirit while their bodies lay in bed. I'm not a witch, but curiosity is its own kind of temptation. In February 2024, near the anniversary of the 1127 Peterborough sighting, I decided to blow the whistle. It was a still, cold night in my hometown in Massachusetts. Snow muffled the suburban streets. I stepped into my backyard just before midnight. My breath clouded. I raised the whistle and blew. No sound emerged. I blew again. Still nothing. Feeling ridiculous, I lowered it. That's when I heard them. Faint at first, then closer. The same horns I'd heard in Wistman's Wood. I felt the air pressure change like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Clouds raced across the sky, blotting out the stars. The neighborhood lights flickered. My dog whined and pawed at the door. I stepped away from the house, heart hammering. The rumble came from above, not the ground. I looked up. A line of shadowed riders raced across the clouds, silhouetted against the moon. Their horses galloped on air. Their hounds leaped from roof to roof without disturbing the snow. At their head rode a figure taller than the rest, wearing a cloak that billowed like a storm cloud. For a brief second, the figure turned, and beneath the hood I saw not a face but 2 burning points of light. I realized, absurdly, that the eyes were the same color as those of the hound that took my bread. In his hand, the leader carried a spear. He raised it and pointed at me. My body went weightless. The ground vanished. I was yanked upward like a kite caught in a gale. Wind roared in my ears. My house shrank to a dollhouse, the cul-de-sac a string of silver. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. The hounds barked around me, their jaws snapping inches from my face. For a heartbeat, I thought I would be devoured. Then the leader spoke, not aloud, but in my mind. The voice was like the wind through bare trees, ancient, cold, and indifferent. "You fed my hound," it said. "Your debt is paid." I expected to be dropped. Instead, I felt myself dragged along in their wake, like a balloon tied to the back of a truck. We raced over forests and frozen lakes, over towns where street lights flickered as the hunt passed overhead. I saw cars skid on ice as unseen forces blew across highways. I saw a pair of headlights vanish into a snowbank. I remembered the warning that seeing the hunt portends misfortune. How many accidents had been blamed on icy roads when the real cause rode above them? Time became meaningless. We could have flown for hours or minutes. At one point, I glimpsed a dark, iron tower piercing the clouds, perhaps a radio mast near Mount Washington. The leader's hound snapped at my foot, and I heard the voice again. Remember. Then I was falling. Cold air burned my face. I slammed into snow with enough force to knock the wind out of me. When I staggered to my feet, I was standing on a hill overlooking Lake Willoughby in Vermont. More than 100 miles from my house, my phone was dead. My watch read 3:17 a.m. My footprints were the only ones in the snow. In my pocket, the whistle had split down the middle, as if by extreme pressure. It took me half the day to get home. My family thought I'd sleepwalked. The police suggested I'd been drinking. I told no one the truth. In the months since, I've followed news of unexplained accidents on winter nights, of people found miles from home without knowing how they got there. I track severe storm warnings and avoid being outside after dark in December. Each year, around the winter solstice, I hear faint horns in the distance. Sometimes I see shadowy riders through my window, galloping across the clouds. I remember the voice. Your debt is paid, but debts can be called in again, so I keep bread by the door. I don't blow the whistle, and when the wind rises and the world goes unnaturally still, I close my eyes and hope the wild hunt passes me by. It was the way the woods pressed in from all sides that unsettled me first. 50 miles north of Munich, near the Bavarian hamlet of Kaifeck, there used to be a place called Hinterkaifeck, behind Kaifeck. The farmstead sat half a mile off the road, hidden by dense spruce forest. As a boy growing up in Augsburg, I heard it whispered about at my grandmother's table. In March 1922, 6 people were murdered there. The killer was never found. Decades later, after inheriting an old postcard showing the farmhouse beneath a heavy snowfall, I finally decided to visit the place that had haunted my family's stories. It was late autumn, the leaves long since fallen, and the only sound was the crunch of my boots on the leaf litter. Standing in the clearing today, there's nothing but a memorial stone marking the approximate site where the barn once stood. But when I closed my eyes, I could almost hear the lowing of cows and the thud of a wood axe. In '92, 63-year-old Andreas Gruber lived here with his wife, Cecilia, their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph, and their new maid, Maria Baumgartner. They were an insular family, wary of neighbours. Yet in the weeks before the murders, strange things began happening. The previous maid, Crescens Rieger, quit 6 months earlier after hearing footsteps in the attic and feeling watched. Andreas shrugged off her fears, but even he later told neighbors that he'd discovered unknown footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the house, no tracks leading back, and a newspaper he hadn't purchased lying on the porch. The night of 31st March 1922 was bitterly cold. Maria had arrived at the farm that afternoon, her first day on the job. No one knows precisely what happened after dark, but investigators believe Andreas, his wife, Victoria, and young Cecilia were lured one by one into the barn through the stable and bludgeoned to death with a mattock. Later, the killer went inside and killed Joseph in his bassinet and Maria in her bed with the same tool. When their bodies were found days later, Hay and sheets covered their heads. I imagined the scene, the barn full of shadows, the iron smell of blood, the dull thud of the mattock. The idea that one person could methodically murder an entire family and then calmly feed the animals and sweep the barn is what always sent chills down my spine. That's another detail. After the killings, someone stayed on the farm. 4 long days passed before neighbors grew worried. Cecilia missed school. Victoria didn't appear at church. On April 4th, farmer Lorenz Schlittenbauer led a search party. In the barn, they found Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and little Cecilia under piles of hay inside the house. Joseph and Maria lay in their rooms. The animals had been fed. The family dog had been let out and back in. Someone had used up all the bread and meat. Smoke had been seen curling from the chimney on the nights after the murders. Whoever killed them likely slept in the house amid the corpses. I traced the footpath that once connected the barn to the house. The air was wet with the smell of earth and decaying leaves, but my mind filled the night with frost and silence. In the official investigation, court physician Johann Baptist Aumüller performed the autopsies in the barn. He noted that the elder Cecilia's head was cracked from 7 blows, and Andreas's cheekbones protruded from shredded flesh. Victoria's skull was smashed with 9 star-shaped wounds. Young Cecilia's jaw was shattered, her face covered in circular wounds. She likely survived for hours, tearing out her hair in agony. Maria and Joseph were killed by crosswise blows to the head. The murder weapon, a mattock, was eventually found hidden in the barn loft. Their skulls were later removed and sent to Munich for metaphysical examination. They vanished during World War II. Despite exhaustive investigations, no one was convicted. Police first suspected vagrants, then abandoned that theory after finding large sums of money untouched. The murderer seemed to know farm work, feeding animals and cutting meat, and moved through the house like someone familiar with its layout. Suspicion fell on several men, including Victoria's neighbour and former lover, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He and Victoria had planned to marry, but Andreas disapproved. Some believed Lorenz killed the family to avoid paying child support for Joseph. Others suspected that Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, had survived World War I and returned out of revenge. Theories even circulated that Joseph was the product of incest between Andreas and Victoria, and that one of them had killed the family. Yet none of the injuries suggested a murder-suicide. The case was closed in 1955, reopened several times, but no killer was ever found. As I walked back to my car, the sun hung low, turning the fields gold. I glanced back at the memorial. It's strange how a place can hold so much terror yet look so ordinary. My grandmother used to say that when snow falls and all is quiet, you can still see footprints leading from the forest to a farmhouse that isn't there anymore. In my mind's eye, I saw them, a single set of tracks that end at a door with a broken lock, and I felt a presence behind me, watching from the tree line, waiting for me to return. By the time I returned home from my trip to Hinterkaifeck, the details of the case had me in their grip. A week later, I found myself at the Bavarian State Library in Munich, buried in police records and newspaper clippings. The deeper I dug, the more disturbing the picture became. The investigation notes describe how the crime scene was contaminated almost immediately. Curious neighbors poked around the barn, moved bodies, and even cooked meals in the kitchen. When the Munich police arrived on April 4th, it had already been more than 72 hours since the murders. Important evidence was likely lost. The authorities removed the skulls to send them to Munich for examination, but any hopes of gleaning metaphysical clues disappeared when the skulls were lost during World War II. A mattock believed to be the murder weapon was only found weeks later in the hayloft. Reading those reports, I was struck by how the killer seemed to live in the house without fear of discovery. On the night of April 1st, a farmer named Simon Reislender saw two figures standing at the edge of the forest at 3 a.m. They turned away when they saw him. Another passerby, Michael Plokel, noted smoke rising from the chimney and was blinded by someone holding a lantern. He described a foul smell in the smoke. In the official Fuchs, there's mention of a key missing from the Gruber house days before the murders, and of Andreas refusing the help of neighbors when he complained about noises. It was as if someone was already living in the attic, waiting for an opportunity. There were other odd details. In May 1927, a stranger stopped a resident of nearby Weidhofen, claimed to be the murderer, and vanished into the forest. During one of the later interrogations, police learned that the family dog had barked furiously at strangers, but was quiet the night of the murders. The Gruber's Pomeranian was found tied up but unharmed. Who could have tied the dog without being bitten? Perhaps someone the animal knew well. The unsolved nature of the case spawned countless theories. One day at the library, an elderly researcher approached me. "You're looking into Hinterkaifeck," she said with a knowing smile. She'd spent decades researching the murders and had come to believe that the killer was never brought to justice because he died soon after, perhaps in an unrelated accident or war. I thought about the bones of the victims buried without their heads in Weidhofen's cemetery, about the rural superstitions and secret affairs that swirled around them. It occurred to me that the answers may have been buried along with the skulls. That night I dreamed of the farm as it once was. In the dream, I walked through the house and up the narrow stairs to the attic. Dust motes swirled in shafts of moonlight. In the corner sat a pallet of straw, an old newspaper spread nearby. I heard breathing that wasn't mine. When I turned, two eyes glinted in the dark, and a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come." I woke with my heart pounding and the smell of smoke in my nostrils. People sometimes ask me why I fixate on such a gruesome story. It's not just the brutality of the murders. It's the eerie prelude. The footsteps in fresh snow leading in but not out. The sounds in the attic. The missing key. It's the fact that someone lived among those corpses for days, feeding animals and stoking fires. And it's the unresolved injustice. 6 people murdered, their skulls lost, their killer never punished. The Hinterkaifeck murders sit at the intersection of folklore and fact. In Germany, when children misbehave, some parents warn them that if they wander into the woods alone, the Hinterkaifeck killer might still be there, waiting to lead them into the barn. A few months after my research trip, I returned to the memorial stone. Snow had fallen, muffling the world. As I stood there, listening to the wind in the trees, I noticed a line of footprints leading from the forest to the edge of the clearing. They weren't mine. They stopped abruptly at the spot where the farmhouse once stood. I followed them with my eyes until they vanished under the fresh snow. No prints led back into the woods. I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of unseen eyes on my back. I didn't look behind me.